This is the first annual Gashimov Memorial in memory of Grandmaster Gashimov, who passed away recently. This is the first edition, 2014. Great loss to the chess world and to the human world as well, both. He was a really good guy and a great chess talent. He will be missed. It's funny, the good ones seem to go first. Oh well. Magnus Carlsen from Norway, current world champion. Carl Nakamura from the United States, former U.S. champion, #1 rated American. Hi folks, John Cordisco back again. Round 2, the Gashimov Memorial 2014. First year memorial for Grandmaster Gashimov from Azerbaijan that passed away. Great loss to the chess community and also the non-chess community. He's a good guy. Anyway, this is my buddy, Carl Nakamura, is black, and his nemesis, current world champion Magnus Carlsen from Norway. Let's get to it. It's a long game. It's going to be a Slav. C4, we'll go through the first few opening moves. Being it's a long game, and plus we're not really going into theory. Interesting, instead of bishop to d3, queen to b3, and then b5, c takes, knight h4. That's an interesting setup. After bishop d3, bishop takes, queen takes. Now, oddly enough, if you notice that light squared bishop for white moved twice, which goes against the rules, but I know for a fact this has to be theory, or Magnus wouldn't have played it. e6, Carlsen castles, Nakamura bishop b4, hitting the knight. Bishop d2, probably more to connect the rooks than anything else. Plus you need to get the bishop out. Castles, rook f to d1. Now interestingly enough, it's almost a half pawn advantage for white. Computer calls for knight takes d5, which I thought was interesting. Instead, Magnus decided to rook f to d1, and after bishop takes, he develops the other knight. Now we've got a bishop against a knight setup, but I don't think Carl is really too concerned about that. b3, queen e7. I'm going to try a little bit more in depth on the analysis for my rating, which is 1600 USCF. A couple of videos ago, the Nakamura Caruana game from this tournament, I really didn't go into a lot of detail, and there was a viewer that made a comment, and I'm going to try to do a little better here. Rook a to c1, rook a to c8. Tiny advantage for white, nothing fantastic. Queen e2, knight to e4. I think this thing is going to start heating up here. Bishop b2, he backs off the dark squared bishop. Carl just develops the rook on d8. It's a pretty close position here right now. That knight is just brutal on e4. Magnus has got to find a way to get rid of that knight, and he does, I think, with knight to e1. And Hikaru, in the computer move as well, he backs it up knight d6. Now this move I thought was really interesting. Bishop a3. Now that's a real pain in the neck because of the fact that you can't move the queen out of danger or the knight's hanging. So knight to f6 is called for by the computer, and I tend to agree. And I think this was maybe Hikaru really wasn't thinking things through. He went f5. Now, went up a little bit in score for white. Nothing fantastic, but I think this is going to cause him some problems later. Because after knight to f6, knight d3, and then queen to c7, and I think black's okay. After f5, d3, then knight to f6. I guess he wanted to control this square here. He wanted to control this square. Makes this pawn weak, but he wanted control. So bishop b4, queen c7, He just basically did what the computer suggested before, except for the f5 move went first. I like the pawn back here better, to be honest with you. Well, that's just me. Queen f3. If you had gone f3, I think a lot of us would. And after knight to f7, it's about a point advantage for white. After queen f3, d takes, b takes. Now this is very similar to a game that Magnus played. He had two whites in a row in round one where he had the isolated a pawn and had all the pawns here. And here we go again. Knight to f7, a4, a5. Now you notice as we're playing along here, this entire game, at least according to the computer, there isn't one question mark move. Not one. And I thought that was a great thing. To two great players. Instead of a5, b6, knight f4, rook e8, queen e2 was an alternative the computer gave. Interesting. I don't know how much it changes, but we'll see. After a5, he just brought back the bishop to e1. Kind of a good spot for it. At b6, Carl's just reinforcing his pawns there. Queen to g3. Now, Magnus is offering the trade of queens. I think Carl in his mind was playing for a win, or at least the option to try for a win. And with the offer of the trade of queens, I think that pretty much sealed the fact that the best that Carl was going to do here is draw. And he traded the queens. H takes. Not as good as F takes, because after knight to g4, bishop f2, c5, and that's a small advantage for black. You got too many pawn islands. After h takes, rook a8, f3, secures these really two good squares here. Here and here. And here and here for that matter, but mostly here and here. Rook A, rook D to b8. Knight rook to c2. I'm not sure what Magnus's idea was on that, if he wants to double up on the c file. b5. Knight to c5. Now that was the third choice of the computer, but I do have to say, in all fairness, all three choices were extremely close in score, within 1/100th of a point. Knight to c5, b takes, rook takes, knight to d5, bishop d2. And I'll tell you, this knight right here is the king on the board in a lot of ways. It's going to be tough to chase him off. e5 by Carl. Magnus goes e4. Carl takes. Magnus takes with a knight. That's another good spot for that knight. There isn't any pawns on either one of these files to chase off the knight. So the only thing that can chase it off is another knight. And he goes knight to b6, hitting the rook. Before that, the only suggestion the computer had for Carl was either rook to b2 or rook to b6. I think a rook to b2 is more in a Carl style, but he analyzed this out and he lost that pawn. And then rook here. This is tough sailing right now. Very tough sailing. Rook to g6. Knight to c4. I'm going to go a little bit quicker here because I'm only allowed 15 minutes on YouTube. D takes. King takes. If knight had taken instead, rook to d6 and knight to c4. After king to h7, rook h4, g4. Knight takes. Rook. Knight. I mean, this is a murderous endgame, late middle game for both players, but especially Carl. He's a pawn down. Bishop c3. It's tough when the best you can do is draw. It's hard psychologically. Rook to b3. Hitting the bishop. Rook goes to d5. Rook to e8. I mean, You've got 4 minor pieces and 4 rooks. This is like, imagine. And Carl was starting to get in serious time trouble. Just we're on move 40 right now. He was in time trouble. He was down to, I believe, 45 seconds when he made the 40th move. Rook to f4, rook to e7. Bishop takes. He loses another pawn. Knight to g6. Rook to f5. It's an over 2¼ point advantage right now for white. And Carl is just trying to find a way to draw this. And he's trying his hardest. Like I said, there was not one move on either side that had a question mark attached to it on the computer. Rook to d1. Knight to c4. Trying to figure out all these knight moves. Good luck. Rook to c1. Computer has suggested rook to c5. Then after knight takes, rook a3. Might have been an alternative, but still it's all bad for black. Knight takes, rook a3. Pretty much the same scenario. He's up 2 full pawns, 1 is passed. Rook a2. I'll go through a few moves here. Rook d7. After rook to d7, rook a6. And Carl is just trying his hardest. It's just tough. I mean, he's pulled out draws before, but this one is tough. Knight d7, g4, rook b7. I guess my thinking was when I watched the game was if somehow he can win white's a pawn, and then later try to get the rooks traded off. Maybe get at least 1 pawn traded. He could sacrifice his knight for 2 of the remaining pawns. White would be a piece up, but it would be a draw. Maybe he's just grasping at straws. That was my thinking. Rook to b5, rook to c7, knight c5. I mean, Carl's still trying. We're on move 52. Rook c6 by Carl. He trades the rook. Okay, got 1 rook traded. Maybe he can win the a pawn. Maybe that's his thinking. Rook to b7, knight to d4, king h3, king g8, rook b4. It's a 2½ point advantage almost for white at this point. He's two full pawns up. Knight to e2. And now comes a great move, one I never really saw. g5. Knight to g1 checked, only the really decent move. If he had played h takes, the king goes to g4. And that's the end of that. It's the end anyway, but he's still trying, Carl. King g3, knight checks. If black had taken, knight to e6, king f7, knight takes, king e7, rook. This is all the computer scenario. Knight checks, king, rook, knight e2, check, king, rook takes. And that's a scenario I thought he was trying for. After knight to e2, king g4, h takes, king takes, knight to g1, rook g4. Excellent move by Magnus. And that's where Carl Nakamura resigned. Still hasn't beaten Magnus yet. Just to finish it off, after king to f7, king to f5 was the computer suggested next couple of moves, and that's just brutal. Anyway, folks, my buddy Carl didn't make it this time. I thought he played okay. He just made small errors along the way that accumulated up over time. And I think he got into a late middle game, end game position that he just had a struggle in. And he just couldn't quite pull it off. Anyway, folks, that's round 2 action from the Gashimov Memorial 2014. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks to all my new subscribers. I really appreciate it. Got quite a few in the last month. Thank you. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. And I want you to remember, if you think chess is just a game, you're not playing it right. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.